The college football playoff rankings are out and Texas is in it. We discussed their path to the national championship. Plus, it's become a conversation amongst Longhorn Nation. Should Texas want to win the SEC championship and get a bye, or should they want a home playoff game at DKR? We discuss on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. You may even be able to use it if Texas does indeed get a home playoff game. At least you'll get $20 off your purchase. You know those tickets will be high. In the first segment, college football playoff rankings. The first ones dropped last night on a Tuesday. In the second segment, the big SEC matchups this week. I give my thoughts on all of them, except for Texas and Florida, which will have the full crossover with Brandon Olson from Locked On Gators dropping tomorrow, Thursday, on audio and video. Every other matchup in the SEC I will predict for this weekend. And then in the last segment, Quinn's confidence. Gunnar Helm said Quinn Ewers needs to get his confidence back up. We discuss in the third segment all of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So obviously yesterday, Tuesday, was one of the biggest days in the country because the college football playoff rankings dropped last night. And so we got to see a glimpse of what the playoff system, the first 12-team playoff system would look like if the season ended today. And of course, we knew that the Texas Longhorns would be in it. They have earned their way into one of the top 12 spots with the way that they've played this year. Obviously, the loss to Georgia, but outside of that, they're 7-1 and have been one of the best teams in college football all season. So it wasn't about if the Texas Longhorns are in the college football playoff. I'm glad we don't have to entertain that conversation. It was more so about the placement and then what would be their path to a potential national championship. So I'm going to put up the bracket on the screen and kind of go through it for my YouTube viewers, for my audio viewers. Just going to have to take my word for it per usual, right? So here we go. Putting this up on the screen. So as you can see, this is the first edition of the college football playoff rankings that will come out each week, right, until the college football playoffs start. And it's a little tricky. So we're going to go through it. If you can see on the left side, the rankings, the way that they ordered these teams doesn't necessarily match the bracket. And that's because the top four teams in the core four, or the core four teams that win their championship game, are going to get a first round bye and automatically be slotted into the top four. So that's why you see on the rankings, BYU is ranked 9th, but they're actually the 4th team in the country in terms of the bracket, because right now they would be the leading team in the Big 12. So when you look at it, it's Oregon number 1, Ohio State number 2, Georgia 3, Miami 4, Texas 5, Penn State number 6, Tennessee number 7, Alabama number 8, Indiana number 8, BYU number 9, Notre Dame number 10, Alabama number 11, and Boise State number 12. Boise State is also important because they are the highest ranked group of 5 team. And every year in the college football playoffs, the highest ranked group of 5 team will make the playoff. And right now that is Boise State. Obviously, they have to, continue to win out and win their conference championship. But, with Ashton Jeanty carrying the ball, they got a really good chance to do that. And then currently the first 2 teams out, so 13 and 14, would be SMU and Texas A&M. But a lot of football to play. This is not locked in by any means. And the matchups you see on your screen are not locked up by any means as well. And then so when you go over to the bracket, what the matchups would look like right now, right? This is all we have to go off of so we can have fun with it. Obviously, the 4 conference champions, once again, would get a bye. So at this point, just projecting it, that would be Oregon, Miami, Georgia, and BYU, right? So when you look at it, Oregon, the number 1 team in the country, obviously they've taken care of business against everybody on their schedule. A few ranked wins against Illinois, and then the big win against Ohio State. Miami, they have not beat a ranked team all year. right? But they're undefeated and they've continued to show fight, coming back down from double digits multiple times. Georgia has looked shaky in a couple of games. They looked shaky against Florida. They looked shaky against Kentucky, but they do have the big win against Texas, who was top 5, top 6 in the CFP rankings. And Georgia, at their best, is one of the best teams in the country, no doubt. And then BYU, you can certainly question the conference and the strength of schedule, but they're undefeated at this point. I do think eventually they may have to look at that, because I don't think BYU is better than a Texas or a Tennessee or a Alabama, right? But they're always, and you can probably make that argument for any Big 12 team moving forward, that they probably wouldn't be better than the second, third, or fourth best team in the SEC, but they're going to get a first round bye just based on being able to play in the Big 12. But it's not BYU's fault that they're playing in the Big 12, right? And then you look at the other team that's ranked in front of Texas, Ohio State. They had the 1 point loss to Oregon. Outside of that, they've been, pretty good. And they had the big win against Penn State, which is a better win than any win that Texas has currently. So you can't really argue about any of the teams that are above Texas, just in terms of the structure and, of the playoff system, with BYU being ahead of them, and then what the other teams ahead of them have accomplished. And then, of course, Georgia beating them head to head. And then right now, when you look at the matchups, right, if it was to fall this way, then Boise State and Ohio State would play in the first round at Ohio State. Indiana and Tennessee would play in the first round at Tennessee. Texas would draw Alabama at home, right, in the first round of the playoffs. And then Notre Dame would travel to Happy Valley to play Penn State in the first round. Now, if we're looking at Texas's path specifically, just based on what we see right now, like I said, obviously this has to change. You still got 4 more games plus the SEC championship. But let's say it was just to fall this way, right? Texas would have to play Alabama in the first round. Then they would have to play Miami in the second round in a bowl game. It would be neutral site. Then in another bowl game in the semifinals, they would have to play the winner of Georgia and either Notre Dame or Penn State. And then in the championship game, they would have to play, I guess, one of Oregon, BYU, Indiana, Tennessee, Ohio State, or Boise State, right? It's a lot of options, but it just depends on however the bracket would end up falling. So a lot of intriguing scenarios with this new 12-team college football playoff, a lot of matchup opportunities. But, once again, we still got, about 5 weeks, another month to go to really solidify these matchups and how it will look. But the conversation, like I said, amongst Longhorn Nation has been, should Texas want to win the SEC championship when the alternative could be a home playoff game at DKR? I don't get it. I just don't get it. First of all, this is a program that went over a decade in the Big 12 without winning a conference championship. Conference championship banners hang forever. Why are we even entertaining the conversation of not wanting a conference championship? After all that trash they talked to us about being in the SEC, your first year in the conference, any year in this conference when you're facing the likes of Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, LSU, whatever, Ole Miss, why are we questioning if Texas should want an SEC championship? That's crazy to me. Like, anytime there's a championship on the line, I want it, period, bar none. I don't think there's anything else to say about it. But then when you look at it, if you are trying to win a national championship, why would you want to have to play 4 games instead of 3? Right? Because you could make it to the SEC championship and lose and still have to play 4 games, right? So going to the SEC championship or not playing in the SEC championship is not a guarantee that you won't have to play 4 games. I probably just messed that up or sounded super confusing. Nonetheless, the only way that you can guarantee only having to play 3 playoff games is going to the SEC championship and winning it, right? There's no guarantee that you're going to play 4 playoff games, get this home game at DKR. We're not unbeatable at DKR. We just saw what happened last time we played there against Georgia. And, like, I just don't get the argument. Like, obviously having a home playoff game at DKR would be super cool. It would be electric, super dope atmosphere, probably at night, something we've never seen, right? A playoff game at DKR. But if your goal is to win a national championship, then the easiest path to do that is getting a first round bye and only having to play 3 playoff games instead of 4. It's just going to be a different level of intensity. And it's not like baseball where you're playing every night and you can be a wild card team and get momentum. you're still going to be playing once a week like your regular season schedule. The games are just ratcheted up with that much intensity. To me, it does not make any sense at all. One, to not want Texas to win the SEC championship. As a fan, I'm not questioning anybody's fandom, but why would you not want them to win the SEC? But two, why would you want to run the risk of having to play 4 playoff games to get to the championship or to win a championship instead of 3? Any team should want to take the first round bye in 3 playoff games to win a championship instead of 4. To me, it's simple math. And when the only alternative is being able to go to a playoff game in Austin, I mean, that's not a good enough alternative for me. That's thinking as a fan, which is cool, right? You're a fan. You should think that way. But as a football team, as a program, if we're trying to win a championship, the best route and what Texas should be striving for, period, is to get to the SEC championship, win it, get that first round bye, and then play 3 games to hoist that trophy at the end of the season and win a national championship. Quick word from our sponsors, and then we get into the big SEC matchups this weekend. Some really good ones that don't involve the Texas Longhorns. Once again, crossover coming tomorrow on Thursday's episode with Brandon Olson from Locked On Gators. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Whether it's in the Moody Center to see the basketball team or in DKR to see the football team, you have 2 more opportunities. You can use Gametime Picks to filter out the fluff and show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets, right? Outside of the priority Gametime Picks, Gametime has all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Seat views, get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. The lowest price guarantee or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Gametime ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime Picks. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, getting into the big SEC matchups of the weekend. I believe all the teams are done playing cupcakes, or there's a couple teams that are still playing cupcakes, but we don't really see too much of that this weekend. So some big games in the SEC on the slate, once again, outside of Texas and Florida, which is actually the second biggest spread in the SEC this weekend. Texas is favored by 21.5 over Florida, but Tennessee is favored by 24 points over Mississippi State. So you would think 21.5 is in the SEC would be the biggest spread, but Tennessee is favored by a little bit more over Mississippi State, which makes sense. Mississippi State only has 2 wins at this point in the season. I'm not sure they have an SEC win. I believe both of those came out of conference. So when you look at the first matchup, we're going to be discussing Oklahoma and Missouri. Oklahoma favored by 2.5 points in this game, even on the road. The biggest reason for that, if you haven't been following, is that Brady Cook, their starting quarterback, is not expected to play, right? And that's really the only way that you would see such a big swing of the spread, because I think initially Missouri was favored by 3 or 4 points, and then now it's, Oklahoma by a field goal, and it's because Brady Cook is not expected to play. He's been really banged up. Obviously left that game against Auburn and then came back and then got hurt even more the week after that, whoever they played, I can't remember. And so, yeah, it doesn't look like he's going to be playing this weekend. And so now you have Oklahoma coming into town. This is a big rivalry game. They've been talking smack all summer since Caden Green left Oklahoma and went to Missouri. So it's going to be a lot of passion on both sides. When you look at it, it's funny talking to our Oklahoma host. They talked about how, Oklahoma was able to get right. And I was just talking about, like, Oklahoma used to be a proud program, bro. And now you're talking about getting right against Maine. But that's where they are. We can't laugh. Texas was, I guess, once in that position where we had to get right against non-conference opponents. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. So when you look at it, Jackson Arnold and this offense has shown a little bit more of a pulse, right? This is both teams that have been, pretty disappointing throughout the season based on preseason expectations, even Oklahoma. But the offense is starting to show a little bit more, right? Still anemic, but they're starting to show a little bit more. The defense, you can still count on them to force turnovers and make big plays in the big moments. And Missouri, even with Drew Cook, hasn't looked amazing, but with their backup quarterback, with Brady Cook, excuse me, but with their backup quarterback, I really just don't think that they have a chance in this game. It's going to be a tough environment. It's going to be tough for Oklahoma to win at Missouri, a big rivalry game. It's going to be a lot of passion there on both sides. But I just think with, Missouri being with their backup quarterback, they just haven't looked like a great polished team all year. Even when they were in the top 10, they were probably overranked to start the season. I think Oklahoma goes in there and gets a big win. Also, Oklahoma fighting to be bowl eligible. They do play Alabama and LSU after this. So if they're going to get a win, it has to be against Missouri. And I think they pick it up. As far as the Oklahoma -2.5, you know, yes, I guess I'll take Oklahoma -2.5. I think they win by a field goal at Missouri, but it's going to be a grinded out game. It's going to be tough for both teams. I think Oklahoma has the edge. Georgia and Ole Miss, right? You would think that this is probably the biggest game, in the country this weekend, but Alabama and LSU is being propped up, but maybe more on the line for Alabama and LSU. We'll talk about that in a second. So Georgia favored by 2.5 points on the road. Same situation against Ole Miss. This one is intriguing, because when you look at that Georgia defense and the way that they played against Texas, you would say, okay, it'd be hard for anybody to beat them. And I think the vulnerability of the Ole Miss offense is on their offensive line. But when you look at it, Carson Beck is just allergic at this point, or not allergic. Well, I guess I could say that he's addicted, to just turning the ball over. And it's not like one turnover here, bad fumble here, bad interception here. We're talking about like 3 interception games, like against Alabama, against Texas, Florida. Like he's just turning the ball over ridiculously, at this point. And so that's not just something I think that he can stop this Saturday. I think that he's going to continue to turn the ball over. You have injury concerns with Trevor Etienne. How healthy is he going to be? Obviously, Georgia still has really good running backs. I think they'll be able to run the ball. Kirby Smart gets his team up for games like this, right? And he's probably going to convince Georgia that nobody's picking them to win and everybody's picking Ole Miss. I think when you look at it, when you see what that Ole Miss offense was just able to do, 500 passing yards with Jackson Dart, 5 touchdowns to 1 player. They did that without Trey Harris. Just absolutely blitzed Arkansas on the road. They have their best chance to win this game. Lane Kiffin does not win these type of games. He just does not. And Kirby Smart does not lose these type of games, right? He's gone damn near 50 games without losing to somebody not named Alabama. But I do think Jackson Dart is a baller. I do think he has a good chance to take advantage of some of those opportunities that Georgia's going to give him in coverage that Texas could not take care of on the road. Like I said, Kirby Smart does not lose these type of games. Lane Kiffin does not win these type of games. I do think that, Jackson Dart has the potential to be the best player on the field, but we got to go with 50 games of data. I'm going to go with Georgia, but I do think Ole Miss has a really good chance to win this game. So I would say Georgia -2.5. They find a way to cover that. But my heart, I'm going with my head on that one. My heart is telling me that Ole Miss finds a way to break through and win this game. South Carolina versus Vanderbilt. South Carolina is favored by 3.5 on the road at Vandy. Look, Vandy has been disrespected all year in terms of the spread. They obviously beat Alabama outright, beat Virginia Tech outright as well when they were double-digit underdogs, covered the spread against Missouri. They lost a couple times in overtime. They were underdogs by like 18 points against Kentucky, which was insane. I should have put my life savings on that. Covered the spread against them, covered their spread against Texas. I can't remember against Auburn. I know Auburn was 7.5 point favorites. I can't remember what the end score was that. But nonetheless, they're, underdogs again at home against South Carolina. But I think it makes sense. When you see what South Carolina was able to do against Texas A&M, that's what South Carolina can look like when they're on their A game. Just this defense is relentless. They're hellacious, and I think they're going to come after Diego Pavia in that offense, and they're going to be able to shut them down. And then offensively, when, Rocket Sanders is playing that way and Lenore Sellers is playing within himself, running the ball, making, key timely passes and not turning the ball over, South Carolina can be one of the most dangerous teams in the country. If they don't blow a 17-point lead to LSU, or if they hold on against Alabama, we're talking about this team in a completely different breath. So 3.5, that kind of gives me pause just because they have to win by more than a field goal. But I do think South Carolina finds a way to win this game against Vanderbilt. No shame for Vanderbilt in this. South Carolina playing really good ball. They've played really good ball all year, just outside of a few lapses against LSU and Alabama. And, Vandy's bowl eligible for the first time in forever. So regardless of what happens the rest of the season, they're somewhat playing with house money. Mississippi State versus Tennessee. Tennessee favored by 24. I would like Mississippi State in this one. I think Mississippi State finds a way to keep it closer. than 24 points. They play inspired football. They're just not really good enough to win games at this point. Nico Iamaleava, he does miss a lot of opportunities on offense, and he has a tendency to turn the ball over. Now, this Tennessee defense is elite, certainly one of the best in the country. And when you're going against a true freshman in Michael Van Buren, there can be some opportunities for him to struggle, but we also saw him throw for 300 yards against Georgia, right? He is a really good player. He just doesn't have a lot to work with at Mississippi State. So I do think that Tennessee will win this game, somewhat handily, but 24 points is a lot, right? And I think that Mississippi State can find a way to keep it within 24 points, even though they don't have a chance to win this game. And then Alabama and LSU, Bama favored by 3 points, the big game of the weekend, really a playoff game, an early playoff game when you look at it, because LSU already has 2 losses to USC and Texas A&M, and then Bama has 2 losses, to Vanderbilt and Tennessee. So this is a playoff game for both teams. Bama's really not fighting to get in the SEC championship right now, but they're in the college football playoffs at number 11. If they lose another game, will we see a 9-3 team in the playoffs? Right now, it doesn't look likely, but it's Bama. They can always find a way to push them in there. And then LSU was still fighting to be in the SEC championship because one of their losses was to USC, which obviously doesn't count towards that. But will a 3-loss LSU team get into the playoffs? That's not likely either. So the team that loses on Saturday night between Bama and LSU more than likely will not be in the college football playoffs this season. It is a de facto playoff game. The key for me is, can Jalen Milroe get back to playing clean football, right? I think he can make throws if he can spread the ball around, not target, Ryan Williams 25 times, run the ball, keep the ball himself on offense. Kalen DeBoer really getting his bag offensively with the play calling. They can find a way to win this game. It's going to be a tough environment in Death Valley. But I was told that, in 67 years, this is a stat I just heard, Alabama's only lost there 6 times, so it hasn't been a tough place to play for Alabama necessarily. And I think this defense can make some plays. LSU, they're going to be explosive on offense, but I think that Alabama's offense can win the matchup against LSU's defense. And so I'm going to take Bama in this game. They're favored by 3 points. Whether you want to take that or not is up to you. But I do think Bama finds a way to win this game and keeps their name in the college football playoff conversation. A quick word from our sponsors, and then Quinn's confidence needs to get back up per Gunnar Helm. We discussed that in the last segment of today's episode of Locked On Longhorns. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by FanDuel. NFL fans, college football fans, football fans. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Basketball, right? Back on too. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com. Bet on your favorite team today. All right. So talking about Quinn's confidence, right? That has been a conversation. Gunnar Helm was asked about pushing the ball down the field. And I'm going to read this directly. He said, it takes all 11 on offense. Gunnar Helm said about working deeper down the field. Mentioned Quinn Ewers will make the throws. He just needs to get his confidence back up. I don't think that's true. And let me be I shouldn't have made that dramatic pause. Let me be clear about what I do not think is true, right? I have looked at the numbers. I've talked about it on Locked On Longhorns with Pro Football Focus. Quinn Ewers' average depth of target for 3 years, he's now been a starter at 3 years at the University of Texas, it has dropped each year, right? When you look at his highest average depth of target in any game this year, it was 6.3 against Colorado State in the first game. His lowest was 5.8, right? So he has hovered in every game before the injury and after the injury between 5.8 and 6.3. So I don't think the reason, I guess you could say maybe he doesn't feel confident in completing those throws, so he doesn't even look down there. Maybe that's the confidence thing, but I don't think it's a scenario in which Quinn has lost his confidence throughout the season and then stopped throwing the ball deep. I think that that's just not his game. Like right now, for whatever reason, that's not his game. And it's kind of become less and less his game over the course of him being at the University of Texas. So I don't think that he stopped throwing the ball down the field this year because he lost his confidence, right? Unless you're telling me he came into the Colorado State game not confident, which I don't believe. I just believe that Quinn Ewers is more of a short to intermediate guy at this point, right? in that he doesn't really look down the field or take those opportunities. But I do think that Steve Sarkisian has a chance to build up Quinn Ewers' confidence in this game, because when you look at it, since he's come back from injury, he hasn't had a lot to be confident about, right? Or he hasn't had a lot to feel proud about. Yes, you beat Oklahoma 34-3, but he wasn't necessarily great in that game, right? So there was a lot for improvement. Obviously runs into the buzzsaw against Georgia. And then Vandy, I think that, Steve Sarkisian did what he could to make Quinn Ewers confident in that game with a lot of passing attempts, really getting him in a rhythm. But then when you throw, 2 turnovers and end up in a dogfight at the end, largely because of it, you can't really go home and just pat yourself on the back because of it, even though Steve Sarkisian coddled him in the press conference and said that, those tipped balls, really aren't Quinn Ewers. Like, yes, they are, but anyways, he hasn't had in his last 3 performances one that he could just go home and feel great about, right? Now you're playing this Florida team who had been playing inspired football, but they just lost DJ Lagway. They're on their 3rd string quarterback. I would be shocked if Florida comes in here. It is Texas. Texas usually gets other teams' best shots, but I would be shocked if Florida really comes into DKR and plays for 60 minutes with a pulse, right? I think Steve Sarkisian has an opportunity to really get Quinn Ewers going, pushing the ball down the field, right? Not just the screens, not just the checkdowns. I think he needs to get in his ear and say, we are going to push the ball down the field. And I think if Quinn Ewers can go out, throw the ball all over the yard, Texas win the game by 20 plus points. He has, 250, 300 yards, 3 passing touchdowns, doesn't turn the ball over. I think that'll go a long way in terms of building up Quinn's confidence going towards the back end, of the season, where you got big games against Arkansas and Texas A&M. And then you're going to be talking about the SEC championship potentially in the playoffs. So I don't think that Quinn lost his confidence throughout the season in terms of throwing the ball down the field. That's just something we haven't really seen from him all year. But I do think against Florida, where you're favored by over 21 points, like I said, this is a team that's probably dead in the water now with their 3rd string quarterback. You have an opportunity to go out and throw the ball all over the field if you're Steve Sarkisian with Quinn Ewers, and you have a chance to get his confidence up going into some of the biggest games on the schedule down the stretch. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Once again, crossover with Brandon Olson from Locked On Gators, and then the big SEC squad show, both dropping on tomorrow's episode on Thursday on this channel. Hug 'em. Peace.